Hello and welcome to the Interrobang's Red Couch podcast. I'm your host, Justin Koehler, and today I have the pleasure of being here with Konstantinos Drossos. How are you today?
Good. How are you, Justin?
I'm great. I hope I pronounced that also, by the way. For the most part, I just know you as Koster.
Yeah, either or works.
So for those who don't know you too well, can you just give a quick little kind of 30-second synopsis about you, just to summarize you really quick?
My name's Konstantinos. Obviously, you said I'm a huge, writing enthusiast. I've always been since I was in high school, like grade 9. I'm big into music and video games, and currently I'm in the journalism broadcasting program, and I'm hoping to either get into music journalism or video game journalism.
Which are both really, really cool, spectacular. I think both of those in some way, shape, or form, I have a bunch of journalists in both areas all over my social media, especially for video game journalism like Polygon and all that. So love it. Do you have kind of like an end goal destination that you'd like to end up for either or?
Well, you mentioned right now for Polygon, or like the big one that we all knew growing up, IGN, that'd be pretty cool to work for them, or to even work for a studio in their internal PR team who release public releases, stuff like that, about upcoming projects, community stuff. That'd be kind of cool to work in.
Yeah, 100%. And so with that, there's a lot of really, really good video journalists outlets out there. And you actually come from the video game design program here at Fanshawe College.
Yeah, I did. I started in 2018, straight out of high school. And, my whole idea was, because growing up, I wanted to be a writer for just in general, right? I was able to go to the video game design program to learn all the basics about the industry. And, when I left there, I was like, okay, now I got the writing portion that I've always wanted to get done. So I was like, you know what? I can really use the journalism program at Fanshawe to craft up my skills, but, it'll help me sharpen my creative writing skills as well with different skills and whatnot. And I think that was a good thing, because a lot of writers who are currently working at studios have a background in journalism, and they jumped that ship in that sense from video game journalism to a studio working as a writer. And I'm hoping I can follow the same suit.
Yeah, here's hoping. And so jumping over to from a very kind of technical, creative program like video game design over to a more kind of writing-based program like broadcast journalism, how was it making that adjustment for you from one program to the other?
It's interesting because at game design, I was there at the studio around the clock, right? So the work ethic, the hard grind that you do in journalism, is still there. What I will say that's a little different, and I think really alleviating is the workload, right? With game design, you're working on these projects that are involved. You need a lot of artistic intellect and whatnot, and I didn't have an art background going into that, right? So going into that was quite difficult. And the same thing with with writing. It's an art, right? You need somewhat of a background in that, and I did have that kind of edge because in high school I did creative writing and I did do different forms of essay writing and stuff. But again, you spending hours at the college, you see the time roll by so quickly. It's like you realize it's 8 a.m. and then it's 8 p.m. next time you look at the computer, right, or the clock. So I think the work ethic, the being punctual with your time and stuff like that kind of understanding and that training I had in game design was a nice way to ease into the journalism world, with the exception that, it's not as demanding when it comes to what kind of projects you're doing and the stuff you're doing, with other people and stuff like that. So it's hands-on, but not as demanding.
I can definitely relate to that all too well, because for those who don't know, I also spent about a year and a half in that same video game design program. I was kind of the opposite of you, though. I really thrived on the digital drawing, the more kind of concept style of it, less so the technical side with the animation and the 3D modeling. I hated it. So it's a little bit of the opposite. And so just to kind of go into a Fanshawe side a little bit, the two different programs that you've been in, the one is more downtown campus specific. The program you're in now is here on main campus for Fanshawe. What are some of the big differences that you've noticed between one campus versus the other?
Yeah, I've actually talked about this quite a lot with my friends in my program and whatnot. And, the cool thing about the downtown campus for me was how cool of a small knit kind of community it was, right? Because downtown, you're kind of on your own. You're a satellite campus in a sense. Unlike here at main campus, where you have the Oasis and you have other, restaurants. We just had the Chef's Table. We had the Cover Garden Market. And it was nice because my friends and I, we'd be working late sometimes, and we'd be, we'd leave class, go and grab coffee and stuff, and do things. But I know a lot of people don't know too is that FSU does a lot of cool things down there too in the Commons area in the building that used to be the Kingsmill building. They do a lot of their own interesting things in regards to different events. Having key speakers, because the downtown campus has the culinary program. We had a very famous Canadian Chef Michael, I forget his last name, come and give a talk there, and everyone, even from my program, we went down, we visited him, and we watched him cook a cool dish, and we got to try a little bit of it, which is kind of cool, and stuff like that. And it was kind of interesting as well, because even the culinary kids on Fridays, whenever they'd be baking, fresh goods or something like that, they give them out for free to students who were there in the morning, right? So we'd go to class early in the morning at 8 a.m. and then once we wrapped up, our prof and I we'd go right across the ways to the culinary program, and we'd grab a bite to eat.
It's one of the important things of doing a program down there is making friends with a culinary student early. And so shifting from Fanshawe kind of into the Interrobang now, a lot of people listening will know you from working a lot over the summer. You were part of the reporting team throughout the whole summer with the Interrobang, and you've done a couple episodes of the Interrobang podcast as well, the Red Couch podcast. So now that you've shifted from a more newspaper-focused role back into the journalism program where we're doing a lot more on air, how has it been not only doing the shift from the one style to the other, but then also balancing the workload of the two now at the same time?
It's interesting. The one thing I will do is keeping less is more in the terms of details. With articles, you're writing things that are super detailed, and with the print, the difference between print and on air is you have to keep that insane amount of detail but in very few words. So you really got to be witty with your verbs and your nouns and whatever, your overall vocabulary and what you have. And one challenge was that, when I came back from vacation and I entered on the radio, it had been 4 months since my last broadcast, right? And one thing is, how am I able to convey a story that's so rich in detail and convey it within a few sentences, right? And that was one challenge that I'm currently, I think of myself, I'm progressing pretty well, but that was one thing that I noticed making the switch from print back to radio, because before you and I, we were in our first year, we didn't really know a lot about print, right? And then starting to work here at the Interrobang helped ease and find different workflows and work ethics that could help you craft a story that's 500 words long or more, right? So going back, working forward, and kind of going back to where you were before 4 months earlier, with print and whatnot, because you're not doing web, you're doing both. That was quite a thing. Is keeping the detail but at a condensed form.
Yeah, and each of the main kind of benefits for either medium also kind of works as a bit of a con, like you said, where like for writing for on air, for radio, for broadcasting, it's very clear, it's very concise, it really gives you the message really quick. But then with that, you can lose out a lot on the details. And then on the more article writing side, the total opposite. You can kind of go into a little bit more details. You can provide a little bit more of the kind of story aspects of it as well, whatever you're covering, but a bit less clear, a bit less concise.
Yeah, and the other benefit of working at the Interrobang as well was it taught you different ways to help improve your creativity. So, for example, I remember back in my last semester of first year, coming up with podcast ideas was quite a marvel, because, again, when you're doing these 10-minute shows and you need to find people to talk to and what to talk about, right? Working at the podcast here was a really good step to help, where to look for people and where to look for content and what people want to see. Coming up with ideas, and even on my off time when I'd be on break, I'd spend a good hour or two just coming up with different article ideas, right? Who to talk to for podcasts and whatnot. And I'm still using that list that I made this past summer for content I want to produce at the X, right? So I think that's quite a big benefit, because it helped you, like I said earlier, create and sharpen your creative skills.
And so now this is kind of a reporter rant episode. So now would be a really good time to start talking about the issue that's coming out that should be releasing today, which is the diversity issue. What stories did you end up covering for this issue?
So the one interesting thing that I talked about, and I had the privilege of speaking to a professor here from hockey culture, Claire Senior. I got to dive into the new WHPL, which is the new professional women's hockey league that was just established. I think they're hoping for that to be the next NHL, but for women, right? And what was cool about that was talking to Claire and getting her perspective on it. Whether we'll see co-ed hockey with females partaking in the OHL and stuff like that, but to also get the humanistic side of it, right? Like having how little boys have the NHL to look up to. This now gives little girls who want to become professional hockey players the chance to see their own role models, showing them, hey, we could do this as well, right? And to mention, as well, like some of these people who are partaking in the women's hockey league, they're mothers. And she made a good point, and Claire made a good point of pointing out that these are people that are juggling lives of being mothers, working another job as well, but also playing the sport that they admired, that they aspired to play from such a young age.
And I think the whole thing of just a new major league sort of being made in front of us is actually really, really cool. So I know watching that draft in particular was a really cool experience to watch, because it's just like, it's not like every other year in every other sport where you're just, you're drafting all the new kids on the block, the new people coming out of high school, so on and so on. You're watching a whole sport league get drafted in front of your eyes, which was a really cool experience.
And the great thing about that too, that you brought that up, is these are also players that we know of, right? So like, for example, Sarah Nurse was drafted into the league. Other big names from the Olympics that we saw growing up, they're now going to be a part of this league and a part of the 6 teams. And the best part is 3 of the 6 teams that are being introduced, they've yet to release their names, but they're all like 3 of them are Canadian and 3 in the U.S. So it's cool to see some Canadian action there as well.
Oh yeah, especially just the Canadian side. Always good to see a bunch of representation. Like, I know hockey in general, there's a lot of Canadian teams. When you look at other sports like baseball or football, there's less, which makes it tough to be a Canadian fan, but it is reassuring to see a brand new league being made and seeing an even 50-50 split of Canadian and American teams. Was that everything that you covered for this issue?
No, I actually covered, this was kind of cool too, is like forms of coffee from around the world. And I got to talk about different forms. One, for example, that I talked about was iced coffee from Greece, right? And when I was in Greece this past summer, I had no idea what this was, right? We had one that we grew up around here in Canada, but there were 2 other ones that I had no idea, and it's called Freddo Espresso. And what it is, it's espresso that's made into an iced coffee form, and you never really see that around, right? And it's whipped with like a machine. So I talked a little bit about that, and I talked about Turkish coffee, because Turkish coffee isn't like brewed in in the sand, yeah. You heat up the sand, and that's how they make it. And they pour hot water, and then the heat of the sand heats up the coffee and makes it that way, And some other interesting ones, for example, like one was like cat poop that, it's disgusting, I know, but it's an extremely expensive form of coffee that's harvested from fecal matter from cats, which is quite interesting. It made me think, why is that, so expensive? But I guess people have their own tastes for delicacy, that way.
Interesting is a really good word for it. That's awesome. I'm kind of excited to read that, like all those details now. That's pretty cool. And so you did mention Greece. You are Greek, and you spent part of your summer there. I know you had mentioned you were in Greece for actually a very interesting time as well, with everything that was going on in the world at the time. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so there were some pretty big stories when I was there. I'll start off with the first one, was the fires. That's an ongoing thing with Greece every summer. There's a bunch of fires that break out across the country. Very sad thing, but when I was at a beach, I almost dropped what I was doing to start reporting on it to send back to the X, because I was there, right? But what happened was there were helicopters going over top of the beach where I was at, and it wasn't just any normal helicopter. These were helicopters that you see on the news that have those big buckets that go down to like pools or other bodies of water to collect water to go and put over a fire. In the distance, where you saw around this land, like this part of this coastal line, was huge smog. And what happened is there was a man who was trying to get an insurance claim, and he set his field on fire, and it ended up burning, I think it was like a portion of a village. That it wasn't a massive fire, but they were able to get it under control. But we saw firefighters going back and forth on the highway, helicopters, and seeing that was quite like shocking, because like you here in America, when we see stuff like that happening, it's on the TV screen. When I was there, it was above me, right? The other thing that kind of shocked a lot of Europe, especially where I was there was a man that was pushed off of a boat. And not funny thing, but the thing that happened was the day that altercation happened was a few hours after I arrived back from an island I just came back from. The ferry I was on, you could see in the video on the news, was parked right next to it, right? So that was quite interesting. But the fires, I think, was one that was like you're so used to it seeing it on the TV, but you were actually there on scene right there as it was happening. So that was quite interesting.
It is. It's kind of a mix of cool and unnerving being that close to stories that have just happened.
Even the floods too. Yeah.
So it's always just I guess a strange experience to be that close to it.
It is. And I was talking with my family about that because towards the tail end of our trip, I forgot to mention it, there were mass floods that pretty much set a whole bunch of people displaced. So many people displaced in the main regions. Around 200,000 people were displaced from all these floods. And I looked at one area on the TV where it was, and it looked like a river just running through an abandoned settlement. Right? No, I was there 2 weeks prior having a gyro in the town square, and 2 weeks later, chairs are being flushed away by overflowing water and whatnot. So that was quite like shocking as well. It's something, like you said, yeah.
I know a lot of that, especially the fires in particular. Canada was no stranger to it. It was an eventful summer for that. I remember doing a lot of coverage, doing a lot of interviews, sort of localizing that whole angle as that was going on. But then to hear that it's not just a Canada problem. Other countries around the world are also having the same problem right now was just strange to read about as well. So yeah, very, very eventful summer, I guess, is one word for it. Yeah. And so now at this point, you've been reporting, doing journalism, writing, performing for about, what would it be, like a year and a few months now? Throughout the whole time that you've been covering stories and reporting, what so far has been the most difficult story for you to cover? What's been the one that either you had to do a lot of grunt work on, or either just mentally or emotionally was just the hardest one to write out?
Yeah, last week I had the privilege of speaking with a local Londoner who has family trapped in Gaza. I came in on a regular Monday morning, was looking through the local wire, and I see on the national wire, local Londoner has family trapped in Gaza, has heard nothing from Global Affairs Canada. And this is the same day that they announced that they were sending planes to Israel to extract people, but they hadn't announced it yet. So I jumped on that opportunity, and I was able to track down the person I interviewed at their job, and I was privileged to have a good 4-minute interview with them, and the same night I published the story to air. But what was difficult was, even as a journalist, but cultivating the questions to get the information at such a touchy time, right? With what's going on, it's devastating. When you're asking these questions, these people, you're reminding these people of what's going on to their family. And as a journalist, for myself, I'll just say myself, it was an experience trying to, get that on the go. And luckily, I put the story to the air, but afterwards, I just realized, what times we're living in right now and what's going on. And that story, not only was I very thankful for the lady who took the time out of her day and what's going on with her and her family to speak with me, but to get to put that on the air, and get that story out there, because that was something. That was a very, very it was something. Yeah. Sorry.
And I think that would be one of the most difficult things about being a reporter, a journalist in general, is a lot of what we do, a lot of our jobs are based around communicating information to people. And it's the stories that are the tougher ones, the harder ones, the slightly more emotional ones that get really, really tough to separate you as a person from you as a journalist, being like, I need to communicate this story across. I need to hear these people out. But man, is it hard not to really put myself in those shoes and put myself where they are emotionally and hold back the emotions long enough to kind of get the story across.
It's also a better way as well, I'd say, as to educating yourself as a person, right? That's one thing that's kind of rewarding about being a journalist, is educating yourself on current global affairs or issues that are going on within society. And I'm very thankful to be in this position to have those, lessons taught to me.
And of course, there are the countless pros of being a journalist, and there are the stories that you get to talk about on complete opposite end, which are incredibly wholesome, incredibly uplifting, and lovely. So it's just balancing the two kind of sides of all the stories. And so, Costa, just to end off, every person that I interview on this podcast, I like to end with a little lightning round of quick little shotgun questions.
I'm familiar.
More used to you. So the key thing is just to answer it as quick as you can, not think too much about it. None of it's going to be too crazy until I slip in what's your social insurance number in there.
Oh, I'll give you that off the record.
Oh, perfect. And so to get right into it, do you have a favorite food?
Gyro. I love gyro. Yep.
That's a good pick. I wish there were more places in my general vicinity where I could get more just Greek food across the board. I used to go mostly to the Four Seasons down on the northwest end. That used to be one of them.
I love that place. Yeah.
Favorite music artist?
The Red Hot Chili Peppers. Love them. Yeah.
Solid pick. Do you have a favorite movie?
You know what? I was thinking about this earlier today. I was thinking about Twilight. Saw that.
Twilight?
Yeah.
Okay.
Twilight.
I do softball every week, and one of the key things I'm trying to do is replicate Jasper's like bat flip thing from Twilight that he does.
Yeah.
I am way less graceful about it than Jasper is. Summer or winter?
I like both, but I'll just stick Canadian. I love winter. Hockey season's my favorite, so.
Safe call. I'm not afraid of saying I hate winter. Winter sucks. Are you more of a city person or a country person?
City, yeah.
I hear ya. Coffee or tea?
Coffee. Iced is my go-to.
See, anytime I have coffee, even it could be 40 degrees outside and I'll still have hot coffee. For some reason, I just don't do iced or cold brew coffee and all that. For some reason. I mean, coffee's coffee at the end of the day, but do you have a favorite hobby?
Playing music. I'm a drummer. I'm also a pianist, and I love learning new songs and exploring different music as well. That's my favorite thing. Yeah.
Are there any songs that you're kind of learning at the moment?
I've been trying to learn a lot of there's one band that I came across. I forget their name, but they have a song called "Youngest Daughter" and it has like a very heavy grunge tone. So I'm trying to learn all these different artists. Yeah, I like them. Nice. It's a new song.
And last little one, do you have a favorite celebrity at all?
Favorite celebrity? I'd probably have to say Sacha Baron Cohen, Borat.
Okay, yeah, okay. That's a respect.
Yeah, he's funny.
A lot of different roles. A lot of people kind of picture Sacha Baron Cohen as the funny one.
Oh yeah.
But then even seeing, I think he did Sweeney Todd with like Johnny Depp and all them too. So
interesting. I don't think I've seen that, but yeah, he's good. Whether the role's serious or whether it's funny, he always fits the bill perfectly. He's great. Yeah.
And so that pretty much wraps it up for this episode. Thank you for jumping on board.
Thank you for having me.
And so this has been the Interrobang's Red Couch podcast. You can listen to previous and future episodes on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, Google, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Be sure to catch our next issue, which hits shelves today, or on our website at theinterrobang.ca, where you can stay up to date on all things Fanshawe. For the Red Couch podcast, I'm Justin Koehler.